From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
We're talking with Bret Dean, composer, violist, and conductor. You are just the most perfect person to tell us about all things viola. But anyway, it's very exciting for us to present you here at the Library of Congress as both a composer and a performer. Your new work, Rooms of Elsinore, is a co-commission with the Library of Congress and the Santa Fe Chamber Music Festival. We're looking forward to hearing the premiere. And we're also delighted that you're going to be playing on our viola collection item. So tell us a little bit about how did that happen? How did you become a violist, a composer for the viola?
Well, I started on violin, as most kids do, and changed to viola when I was in secondary school, when I was sort of big enough to hold a viola, as it were. And my first teacher, in this is back in Brisbane, was herself a viola player. And so recognised not only something physical about, how it might suit me, but also it's a very different temperament too. The viola attracts a different kind of musician. I mean, we're often the butt of jokes.
Yes.
But we won't go there. I mean, I quite like viola jokes, to be honest.
Okay.
I think it's nice to be able to laugh at oneself a little. But I think also, it's an instrument that, because it's an inner voice, it's like being in the engine room. And I think that's perhaps why there are an unusually high number of viola playing composers, or composers who also played the viola. For me personally, when I spent 15 wonderful years in the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, it was just the greatest place to sit and watch all that was happening. And I hadn't really started out then as a composer. Composition came quite late in the day, really. But as I got more into it, I was just sort of, each day at work was a chance to sit and observe and learn from all these great players around me. And with the viola section also in Berlin, sitting on the outside of the string section opposite the first violins, you had this sort of sweeping gaze across the orchestra, and it was incredibly invigorating and inspiring, to sort of go along to work and learn from what I saw around me.
Right. So you started out on violin and went to viola. What do you think was the reason for that? And was it a sound?
Well, I mean, as I say, my teacher could recognise something about my personality that she felt, as a viola player herself, would suit the viola. And I have to say, I was enjoying playing the violin, but I think she could recognise that, I got to a certain level, and this was the kind of change I needed. Early into secondary school, a great opportunity above all to play lots of chamber music, because you're always in high demand as a viola player. Even then, and even in far away Brisbane. Viola players weren't that many of them, and so there was always lots to do, even in school age, and so I relished that opportunity and really just went for it. And yes, there was something about the distinctive sound of the viola that I really got into then. It wasn't, the shrill high violin, I love the cello as well. I mean, I love all the string instruments, but there's something quite distinctive and unusual about the viola temperament, but also colour of voice that really appealed to me.
And then as a composer, are you finding that's informing the viola works, that special sound, like instead of writing for violin and the piece that we'll be hearing?
Sure. I mean, having said that, a lot of it's quite high, and I love actually the high register of the viola. I've written quite a bit for viola, and some violists say, well, why don't you just write it for a violin? It's in violin register, but it's a completely different sound to a violin in the same register. And I mean, I love playing on the C string as well and going down into the depths of the instrument. But I do like, finding the extremities of any instrument really, but also, in this case, the extremities of the viola, to sort of take it out of its comfort zone too.
So in the commission piece, is there anything you're finding with this instrument that you can do or you can't do? Like, tell me how that's working.
Well, I mean, we only got to know each other yesterday.
You met yesterday.
And so, it's still a getting to know all about you situation. And to be honest, at first I was toying with the idea of playing the Schumann only on this wonderful instrument, and then playing my piece on my own viola. But apart from the fact that they're quite different, it was just so wonderful. Right from the outset, I felt this clarity and this beauty of sound. I really like my own instrument. It's a modern German viola, made for me about 20 years ago by a, at the time, very young maker called Kevin Gentkes in Berlin. But of course, this sort of teaches me something else about the instrument, its potential, its characteristics, and about my own playing, that I'm just really enjoying the experience. It's something so different.
This viola has been on loan to the Library of Congress since 1977. It was built in 1690, a part of a commission for the Medici family. So we've been fortunate. We have two here at the Library of Congress. But this one in particular, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about your thoughts in the piece and what the sounds are that you're thinking, and if you want to at all demonstrate.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's quite an early instrument then, 1690.
It is.
I mean, the other one is
the
later,
other one's
isn't it?
1727.
Right, yeah.
Quite a lot.
Part of the golden age. So I'd really love to compare sometime. But look, it's fascinating in that although it's so different to my own instrument, it has a similar measurement, overall length. So that has made it a little easier to sort of negotiate right from the start. It's the thing about violas generally is that there's no standard size, of course. It's not like violins and celli that more or less have a kind of accepted standard size. Violas differ hugely. I wonder also whether this may have been changed in size over the years. It was certainly not uncommon for violas to be huge and cumbersome, and then over the years have been reduced in size to make them more playable. Having said that, it looks so perfect in its dimensions. It's quite possible that it belonged to this slightly smaller category of violas, where at a time where their differences were massive.
And also why it left it was part of a quintet that was commissioned, and it was sold off in 1803. Went to England, and then to France, back to England, and then came to America in about 1925.
A quintet of string instruments?
Of Stradivari instruments.
So was that two violins, two violas, and
two
a cello?
violas, right.
And I'm pretty sure then that this perhaps was the smaller of the other one, was probably much bigger.
Right. So I don't know why it was broken up and why it's here, but we're fortunate, and we're fortunate to have it on loan to us and available.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's one thing that I mean, there's this moment. There's this moment that keeps recurring as a kind of motto in my piece, which is this sort of broken arpeggio thing. And I must say, with this instrument, it sits kind of nicely on the hand, which can, with a really large viola, you'd have to have a very nice big hand to manage it, going up to a high C sharp. So, you know, it's working out nicely for me thus far. It takes a little bit of getting used to, in this instance, quite a different sort of C string sound. And I noticed that if you press too hard, which I sometimes admit I have to do, you know, on my more modern instrument to really get it to give everything, that doesn't work with an instrument like this. It needs caressing in a different way. Partly also because it has so much clarity anyway. It has this sort of, it speaks very immediately. And yeah, I mean, I'm finding it really thoroughly fascinating.
So, and you're liking the C string?
Yeah, I mean, the C string takes a little bit of getting used to, and I mean, on my instrument, this is a moment from a Hindemith concerto. It's a moment that, you know, on my own instrument I really kind of dig in. Here I feel with this instrument it sort of responds better if you just give it a bit more space and bow transport and don't hit it as hard. And, you know, 24 hours into our relationship, I'm still getting to know how to bring out the best in this instrument. And, you know, players will spend a lifetime with an instrument of this quality and still not to get to know all that it can offer. So it's all too brief. I want one.
Well, fortunately, you'll be here for a few more days with it. I mean, can you really tell the differences in your instrument, this one, and then how you're going to apply that to which piece you're picking and what you're composing for? I mean,
well, of course, as far as the composition itself is concerned, I was sort of working on my own instrument and wasn't really thinking about playing it on something as glorious as this. And at the time also, I wasn't even aware of the Strad being part of the deal, as it were. But
you had played on another
I
Stradivarius.
have played on a Stradivarius, the so-called Gustav Mahler viola, which was also a wonderful experience. That was quite some time ago, probably almost 20 years ago, with a group of string players from the Berlin Philharmonic. And everyone except the double bass player, because there isn't a Stradivarius double bass, but everyone was playing Strads on a tour of Japan, and you know, incredible sound. They were, I guess, also in different states of repair and care, and you know, to maintain an instrument like this is a, you know, as you know, it's a full-time thing. You know, it needs constant attention and you know, care, and so with so many instruments that was sometimes a little varied in response and so on, but nevertheless as a general ensemble sound, to have just nothing but Strads on the stage is quite something. One of the frustrations, I guess, and this is an aspect of the profession in many ways, but particularly in an instance like this, playing on an instrument like this for such a short time, I'd really love to be cloned and be able to go out and have a listen while I'm playing, you know, because that would also just tell me so much in such a quick time to really know how it projects. But it seems to uncannily sort of have, well, I mean, that's the great thing about these instruments, they really do project in a way that you can't always tell under the ear or, you know, right on top of the instrument. And I think that's, you know, one of the things that really, you know, shows the true quality of an instrument, is its ability to carry.
So tell me about your inspiration for the piece and the sound of the viola and how that works. I mean, what inspires you in general? Does sound inspire you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, sound itself is the stuff of it, really. I mean, for a painter, it's colour, and I use that similarity quite deliberately because my wife's a painter, and so we talk about this quite a lot. And yet there are sort of things that are common to both of our undertakings, namely, colour itself.
Right,
Sound
right.
has colour.
And some musicians see in color.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I'm not synesthetic, but nevertheless, I can sort of
You can sort of
see where that comes from. I mean, composition itself, the way a painting is structured. I've learnt so much from being with a creative artist for so many years. In this particular instance, the piece that we're doing on Saturday, and that's been commissioned by the library, is part of an ongoing fascination and immersion into Shakespeare's Hamlet, which is culminating in just a few weeks in the UK in
The
June
opera?
with the premiere of a Hamlet opera that I've
Wonderful.
written for Glyndebourne. And so in even taking on this commission, I said right from the start that I'd love to do this, but I have to say I'm going to be so deeply into Hamlet that is it okay if it's kind of based on the same material,
material.
and so on, which thankfully was fine with the commissioners and with yourselves at the library and with the Santa Fe Chamber Music Festival. And indeed, it's kind of gone. It's very much its own direction. Nevertheless, using tunes from the score.
Mm-hmm.
In this instance, what I've done is also tried to conjure something of the spaces in which the drama unfolds. So the piece is called Rooms of Elsinore. While I was working on the opera over best part of 3-year period, I had on the walls of my studio, I had a whole series of photos taken at so-called Elsinore, or the Kronborg, north of Copenhagen in Denmark. And not that certainly I'm pretty certain, even though I haven't seen all of the costumes or anything, but it's not necessarily a period costume drama that is being presented. The director is Neil Armfield, a wonderful Australian theatre director. Nevertheless, it was fascinating, having done a tour of the castle, to have these photos particularly placed chronologically as far as the unfolding of the drama was concerned for myself and my librettist, Matthew Jocelyn. And also I had this map taken from the sort of tourist guide.
Uh-huh.
And so what I've tried to do is make a kind of guided tour of the space, and we enter through the dark gate into the four-gate courtyard, then to the platform where first of all Horatio and Marcellus and later Hamlet himself sees the ghost of the old King Hamlet, through to the King's chamber, and eventually to the Queen's chamber, out through the chapel, and closing with a sort of bird's eye view taken from the so-called Trumpeter's Tower. So in using moments from the actual opera, it nevertheless has its own dramaturgy, really, and we're also just getting to know it. Juho and I just started work on it today. Juho Pohjohnen, a wonderful Finnish pianist. So it's a fascinating bit of discovery for us.
And then to add
Then
another instrument into
then a
it.
sort of whole different dimension as well.
Is that daunting?
Look, I must say I was a little concerned, because I mean, pianists they live their
They're
lives
so
doing
used
that. And as Juho said earlier, and of course if it's not a good instrument then you've got an excuse. I don't have any excuses here, but getting to know a different instrument
Yeah.
for a string player, as I said, we
Could
create real relationships with the instruments that we have under our chins, and just to sort of get to know a new instrument and 3 days later play a concert on it is something that is can be daunting. I'm thrilled with how we're getting on so far.
So
And
it's not been that difficult. It's been an easy introduction.
Yeah, and also I'm glad that I came a day earlier than originally planned, so that we had a bit of time together.
Right. I mean, we're lucky here at the library that we do have these instruments here. We have this amazing concert hall.
Yeah.
We have the music here, and we have composers like you. We commission music and we keep the music. It is wonderful. We do have to preserve the instruments too, though. So sometimes, balancing it out.
Yeah, I can imagine. But it's so great that they get played.
Right.
That is part of their health.
And that's what
regimen
the first bequest in 1935 with the 5 Stradivari instruments was, to be played, to be heard by the public.
Yeah.
And that's what we do. And the Tuscan Corporation, which has graciously and generously lent us this since 1977, at first for the Juilliard Quartet, who was on residency here for a long time.
Right.
They also, that wants to be played and to be heard. And so we endeavored to do that as much as possible. I'm wondering, in the world of composition and viola playing, are there more pieces being written currently? Are there more violists?
Oh, look, I think the wonderful thing about the viola, I mean, in the same way that there is no sort of standard size, there's also no standard repertoire.
Yeah.
We don't have dozens of sonatas by Mozart or Beethoven. We don't have concertos by Brahms and Sibelius and so on. And so in many ways the repertoire is still coming into fruition. It's so wonderful to know that Hindemith played on the stage of the Coolidge Hall.
Right.
One of my great heroes, particularly in that first time where I was changing to viola, and then following that sort of getting more and more into composition. He was certainly one of my heroes. And the great work that he did for the instrument.
Yeah, sure.
So I mean, it's still coming into focus. But I think because of that, there is this fascination with it because it's kind of unfinished business in some ways, and no one quite knows where that can lead to. So I mean, I'm thrilled also to be doing my bit, and with this piece for viola, alongside 2 pieces for solo viola, a viola concerto,
You've really added
trio with clarinet and piano. Yeah, I mean, it's also been, they've been very important key works for myself on my path as a composer, largely because also they're pieces that I've been able to play a lot. So it's sort of been part of embedding that relationship of what it means to be a performing composer and playing your own works regularly. I think that's been an incredibly important thing for me. Also to have calling cards of pieces that you can take around the place, a bit like a travelling salesman.
Right.
And I mean, the viola concerto in particular has just been a fantastic way to make music with orchestras all around the world and different conductors, and the solo pieces as well have been really important to take to festivals and be able to say, this is really who I am. This is the instrument I play, and this is what I want to say with that instrument, and they're pieces that have been particularly, for that reason, particularly important and dear to me. So I hope that this new piece gets a few outings as well, because so far it's challenging to play.
Is it
hard,
challenging
actually,
to write for viola?
It is. Look, it has its challenges for sure. The viola concerto is a particularly challenging genre because in the way that it sits, sort of more in the middle of the overall register of an orchestra, it's difficult to sort of make space for it. But make space for it you need to do, so that it can be heard in a setting with orchestra. And so that's been part of the learning process too.
You know, there aren't many extant Stradivari violas.
No. We were talking about how many are there? 8
maybe
or
10, maybe, you know, give or take.
Yeah, and I mean the ratio between violas and violins was something
huge. I mean, there's
8 violins to every viola or something.
Right. I think there's
how many violins
extant
are there?
maybe over 600 violins.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
As many as that, right? Yeah, I mean the repertoire for the viola. Yeah, I mean it's a niche part of the repertoire, but I think because, as I was saying earlier, it's still kind of coming into fruition, it does fascinate people. Certainly, you know, the viola fraternity, as a group of players themselves, are, I think, by definition, just much more open to new music. We have to be, you know, but it would be silly not to be open to it, because that's the future of the instrument too. You know, as I say, we don't have the great canon of solo repertoire to rest on and fall back on in the same way as the cello, and in particular the violin. So, you know, I think that is also something of the difference in attitude and personality of violists. You know, we're much more keen to explore new repertoire.
We did commission a piece for viola a couple of years ago too, actually, for this one in mind. Don't know if you want to consider that. What about composing for a particular instrument or a viola?
A particular make of instrument.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's something that I haven't necessarily done that much of, except, of course, and this is then going into very much the time of today, writing a piece for electric violin, and a very particular sort of electric violin that had 6 strings and had a very particular pickup. A piece that in fact includes a moment where the soloist, it was written for the great Australian violinist Richard Tognetti, who's the artistic director of the Australian Chamber Orchestra, and at one point he just blows across the strings, which not every electric violin can do. And so that was very custom built. Also all the effects were custom built around improvising together with Richard on the material used for the piece. So that was a case in point. Yeah.
Okay, and getting back to sound, perhaps we could end with a new sound you've discovered or something you're hearing.
Well, I mean, there's one moment in my piece which has a lot of what I call angle tremolo or brush tremolo, which is which of course isn't what a Stradivarius viola was built for.
1690,
not in
they
1690, but I kind of like, you know, the fact that, you know, the chance to get some different and extended techniques and try them out on a 1690 Strad. It's kind of cool. You know, it keeps it alive too. Yeah, it has a wonderful sweetness too up here. It's just
that really does. Could you play that a little more? That was really, really, really sweet.
Yeah, I mean it's just a beautiful thing to play on.
Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
We're looking forward to hearing your.
Yeah. Well, and thank you to the library for this
and to the Tuscan Corporation.
Yeah,
yes.
Indeed, it's a joy.
All right, thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.